Being self-sustaining is the key to success in hardcore Minecraft. No matter what your goals are, it's important to have safe access to any supplies you'll need to survive. Essentially, you never want to be forced to leave the comfort of your home for basic necessities like food and building materials. You want to be forced to leave your home because you have an unquenchable thirst for adventure and wind up setting ridiculous goals that put you in mortal danger, like willingly traveling to the void to fight a gigantic dragon. But while growing my own food and building materials was enough to simply survive, it wasn't enough for my ambitious dreams. Oh no. If I was going to succeed in fighting that gigantic dragon, I needed a lot of two very important things: sugarcane and cows. Over the last few days, I had been working really hard to get my infrastructure in place, primarily focusing on building a house and starting a mine. With those two components of my infrastructure in place, I could then turn my attention to an absolutely critical aspect of survival: a farm. But first, I turned my attention to building a deck on the side of my house that I would hardly ever use. Why, you ask? I'm still not 100% sure. I guess I thought that spot was a nice place for a deck, being on the side of a mountain and all, but once it was done, I never really went out there. Guess I just always had better stuff to do. And once the deck was finished, I could finally turn my attention to starting a farm. But first I decided to finish my wall. Since spiders are the only mobs smart enough to climb over a 2-block high obstacle, a good wall can be the single most important structure you build in a hardcore Minecraft world. When your primary goal is to avoid getting killed, you'll take all the protection you can get. Whilst building my wall, I used a very precise, advanced technique to keep unnamed horse from escaping while I replaced one side of the dirt stable with the stone wall, which allowed me to free him from his dirt prison. With my neglected deck and impenetrable wall finished, I finally started my farm. I was excited about having an unlimited food supply. Plus, as fun as it was to steal food from the villagers over and over, running up and down those stairs was getting exhausting. So the way farming works in Minecraft is you have to use a hoe to till a block of grass in order to plant a crop on it. For that block to stay tilled, it has to be near a water source. You also need water to grow sugarcane, but you can use grass or sand, and that block doesn't have to be tilled. According to the internet, a block of tilled earth will stay hydrated up to 9 blocks away from a water source. But my space was a bit limited for something quite so grandiose, so I went with a basic 5x5 pattern for each crop plot. Things got a little awkward when one of my neighbors climbed my fence to see what I was doing, but once he started to mansplain farming to me, I took care of him. With the pesky neighbors taken care of, I also set up a small plot to start growing melons. Villagers buy them, and they would make useful potion ingredients later, so melons were important to have. The next morning, I wandered down the mountain to refresh my acacia wood supply and gather some birch wood. I don't really love the color of birch wood, but it's nice to have all the types of wood available. After chopping down some trees, I got the itch to do some light exploring. I really hadn't wandered far from my mountain at this point, so I wanted to get a better feel for what was around me. The only noteworthy thing I really found was my first pumpkin. They're not great for food, but farmer villagers buy them, so that's nice. Besides that, I mostly just hopped on top of the tree canopy of the nearby dark oak forest and took a look at my surroundings. But again, I wasn't really out there that long. Without any enchantments on my armor, I still didn't quite feel confident freely exploring the wilderness. That's where the monsters are. With some of my freshly chopped wood, I made some animal pens. It was time to start capturing and breeding some animals, most importantly, cows and chickens. Remember when I said cows were a crucial part of my plan to kill the Ender Dragon? That's because cows were essential for getting enchantments on my armor and weapons. You have to surround an enchanting table with bookshelves to get the best enchantments, and one of the key ingredients to a bookshelf is, well, books, which are made with leather. Leather is extracted from cows. Therefore, I was going to need a lot of cows. While it's true that you can find bookshelves out in the world, like the ones I found in Village Number 2, that takes a lot of time and exploring, and remember, I wasn't ready for long expeditions just yet. So, I opted for what I could do from the safety of my home, breeding and murdering cows. Chickens, on the other hand, serve a simpler, more direct function. They provide feathers, which are used to make arrows, and you can always use more arrows. The next morning, I tried to make baby chickens by throwing eggs against the wall, but went 0 for 6. It made me sad. I also kept seeing this same cat skulking around my property. I think it was living in the dirt stable with my horse for a while, so I decided to do something about it. And that something is fishing in my 2x2 block pool, which doesn't make any sense. There was literally no room for fish to live in it, but I also don't want to leave the safety of my base, so I'll take it. Eventually, I caught enough fish to lure that cat to me, and we became BFFs. Thrilled that I now had 2 BFFs trapped on my compound with me, I was eager to get more. It was time to get some farm animals. So I stole some crops from the villagers, they're used to it by now, ran toward the field where I first spawned in, and with fists full of wheat and seeds, I managed to trick 2 sheep, 4 chickens, and 2 cows into following me home. It was slow going. Barnyard animals don't swim as fast as you would think, but I eventually got them through the village and back to the base of my mountain. At that point, night was coming quickly, and I didn't want to risk any of the animals, or myself, getting eaten by a zombie or blown up by a creeper, so I decided to dig a hole for them to sleep in. That way, I could prep their living quarters up at the base, and then bring them up in smaller groups. Don't worry, I left the torch in the hole in case any of them were afraid of the dark. Before going to bed, I finally placed glass in some of the open windows, then woke up the next morning ready to populate my farm. I started off strong by throwing 2 eggs and making 1 chicken, still not sure what the probability is for these eggs, and then finished my glorious stone brick stairway to make an easier path for the animals. The process of getting each group of animals out of the hole individually was kind of tough, especially since cows and sheep are both addicted to wheat, and all of the animals wanted to come up at the same time, no matter what food I waved in their faces. But with a lot of maneuvering and even more patience, I was able to get them all up the stairs and into the compound. A little more maneuvering later, and with some help from a cow that willingly walked into his pen, I eventually guided them into their own pens. I also decided to make a pen for my horse so he wouldn't feel left out. Later that evening, on one of the few occasions I would actually use my deck, I was taking in the view of the night sky when I noticed a squadron of heroic golems protecting the locals from a horde of zombies and skeletons. Remember kids, not all heroes wear capes, but the popular ones are made of iron. The next morning, I embraced my new responsibilities as a farmer, harvesting crops, force-feeding wheat by hand to cows to force them to breed, throwing eggs against the wall to make baby chickens, and using seeds to lure the baby chickens back into their pen as an alternative to just killing them. You know, regular farm stuff. With the farm all taken care of, I shifted my focus back down to the basement, where there was still a lot of work to be done. The first order of business was the floor. Couldn't keep that gross natural floor, now could I? Once the old floor was ripped out, I used some stone bricks I had to start filling in the rest of the wall, and set aside space in the room to start my enchanting table setup. I also played around with the room's lighting. I was using torches at first, but those were just placeholders. Eventually, I'd use much fancier lighting. To break up the monotony of construction, I regularly went up to my backyard to feed the animals and harvest my crops and sugarcane. One night before bed, as I was checking out the view from my neglected porch, I noticed a spider inspecting my gutters. Before he could start mansplaining how to take better care of my house, I contextually demonstrated how to fire a bow and arrow. I don't take home improvement advice from trespassers. Adrenaline still pumping from that encounter, I worked tirelessly to get my basement in working order. Once I'd filled in all the walls and the back of the staircase, I made some fancy lanterns for the basement, which are a major upgrade over those garbage torches. That's much better. In a moment of inspiration, I also used some orange terracotta blocks to give the room a little more flavor. I think it brightens up the place a little. After that, I started to fill in the floor, using the classic stone brick look for most of the room, while placing a single purple terracotta block and some polished diorite for the floor around the enchanting table. If I was going to be using magic on that spot, it needed to look fancy. A couple minutes later, I finished up the floor, and just like that, my man cave was finished. I still wanted to fill it up with more stuff that would help me along my journey, but I was happy with the way the room itself turned out. I was feeling particularly in touch with my creative side, so I decided to spruce up my farm with some fancy lighting. I don't have any hard facts to back this up, but I'm pretty sure crops grown under fancy lights produce more delicious food. Once I was satisfied that my farm looked like it was owned by a rich person, I went back down to the basement to start putting together my future potion brewing area. Later in our story, I'll explain in more detail how potion brewing works, but for now, you just need to know that I like my potion brewing stations to have an infinite water source, room for 2 double chests, and room for several brewing stands. All I was missing at this point was some brewing stands, but that would come later. Up next on my agenda was building a storage room. No Minecraft residence is complete without a proper storage area, and while I certainly had goals of making something sophisticated and grandiose down the line, I just needed, for the time being, a decent-sized room where I could store all the junk I had been accumulating. I quickly realized I'd have to do a little landscaping on the side of the mountain to make room for the storage room I had in mind, but luckily, I already had plenty of dirt in my pocket. After all that digging, I needed a new pickaxe, so while I was topside, I decided to grab some leather from a couple of volunteers. I'll explain why in a minute. Got back to digging out the storage room to take my mind off of those poor volunteers, used some creative landscaping techniques to give my storage room enough space, went back to the farm and accepted some feathers that were graciously donated by the local chickens, used some feathers to make some long-range artillery, and used 3 leather to make 3 books, which I turned into 3 bookshelves and subsequently turned into a lectern. Why did I make a lectern, you ask? Well, I'll tell you after we fade to morning. All rested and ready for action, I hurried down the hill to get my day started. This zombie tried to slow me down, but he's not my dad. I do what I want. Little did I know I'd start this day by going on a killing spree, but this Enderman had something I needed, and the fact that he was just minding his own business wasn't going to stop me from building a dirt enclosure, looking him right in the eye, and then killing him. With the help of this iron golem. We shared a moment of mutual respect, then went our separate ways. And before you ask, yes, I did repair the damage I caused to this house when I was murdering an Enderman in the street. Anyway, I told you I'd explain the lectern thing. I was trying to change a villager's profession to a librarian. Librarians sell enchanted books, some of which carry some pretty awesome enchantments, and I wanted to have access to a variety of enchanted books near my compound. Unfortunately, as I was informed by Google, these villagers in green are called nitwits and can't have a profession. Time to try the other village then. At the town meeting, I asked this fellow what his profession was, and when he shook his head in shame, I assumed that meant he wanted a job, so I offered him the chance to become a librarian. But for some reason, he walked away. It's almost like he knew I was only offering him the job so I could later lock him in his house and force him to buy exorbitant amounts of paper from me. Good for him. Later, I found him standing in the doorway of a house with a lectern already in it, which confused me. Did he want to be a librarian after all? Putting 2 lecterns in the room didn't seem to change his mind. Also, why wasn't he just walking into the room? Oh well, some people just can't decide what they want. The following morning, I noticed a lot of shady characters lingering outside the village, and I had been wondering how sharp my sword was, so I did a few tests. The results were positive for me, negative for monsters. I could also tell the golems had cleaned up the night before. There were bones, arrows, and rotten flesh all over the place. I encountered a creeper moments later, and, finally conquering my fear of dying in a gruesome explosion, I tactically dismantled him using the proper techniques. I also came across some iron lying on the ground, the remains of a fallen iron golem. Rest in peace, noble hero. I'll make a nice iron pickaxe in your honor. Eternally grateful for my protection and heroism, the local farmers were happy to accept all the wheat I had piled up from my farm, and I walked away with a few more emeralds in my pocket. To my great surprise, I found a couple of chests in the village that I somehow didn't come across on day 1, so I looted everything valuable and scooted over to village number 2, but not before taking a good, long look at my compound from the ground. Yep, looks good to me. Feeling powerful and overconfident from all the money I just made, I killed this cow because he looked at me funny. Then I got in a fight with this Enderman because I looked at him funny. And he still didn't drop the thing I needed. I ran into that same villager standing in the doorway to this house, and I was still so confused about why he wouldn't just walk inside. I tried everything, moving the lectern, pushing him, until finally I picked up the carpet on the floor, and presto, I had a librarian. It turns out the carpet was just tall enough to keep the villager from walking through the doorway. I guess he couldn't duck his head or bend over. I had mixed feelings about this guy when I checked his available trades and saw that he would trade me bookshelves, good, and enchanted books with Bane of Arthropods, gross. That might be my least favorite enchantment in all of Minecraft. Bane of Arthropods basically increases your attack damage against spiders, but that's pointless, since, as I had demonstrated numerous times already, spiders are super easy to kill. Oh well, at least he sold bookshelves. I really freaked out when I met this guy though. For just 12 emeralds, he'd sell me a sword with looting 1. That's huge! Giddy about the idea of buying a magic sword, I raced back home, killed a cow for no reason on the way, grabbed almost my entire life savings, hopped on unnamed horse, hurried over to the weaponsmith, and bought my sword. Excited to go on a shopping spree, I checked to see how much the librarian's bookshelves cost, and they were definitely not on sale. That's okay though, I found this cleric who was more than happy to take all the rotten flesh I carried around with me for 1 emerald. Feeling triumphant, I raced back up to my house and immediately tested out this looting sword on some of my farm animals. Looting is a really neat enchantment. It increases the number of items and ups your chances of getting something rare. Level 3 is the highest level the enchantment goes to, so, for example, if you kill cows with a looting 3 sword, you might end up with like 3 leather per cow. My new sword had looting 1, which isn't quite as good, but I still killed 9 cows with it and got 15 leather. That's not bad. I put the spoils of my latest murders to good use, crafting 5 bookshelves, but when I placed them down, I realized I had a design flaw in the entrance to my storage room. Nothing an iron pickaxe can't fix. A little while later, I decided to test my sword on some other unsuspecting animals. I killed 3 chickens and ended up with 3 feathers and 3 pieces of raw chicken. I think with a regular weapon, you'd likely get one or the other, so I'll count it as a win to get an average of 1 feather and 1 chicken per chicken kill. Feathers in hand, I laid down and broke a bunch of gravel to make flint, which I then used to make some arrows. I was super excited to possess some ranged weaponry. Attacking things from far away puts you in far less danger. Sadly, this skeleton did not share my enthusiasm. Back in my basement, I worked tirelessly to finish the storage room, replacing the cobblestone wall under the deck, placing upside-down stairs on the ceiling, ensuring the room was properly lit, placing the ceiling, using polished andesite as an accent, filling in the wall, placing shelves for storage chests, digging up the floor, placing a new floor, using polished diorite to make the wall look fancier, placing more shelves for storage chests, tweaking the room's design, more floor digging, more design tweaking, more wall filling, more ceiling placement, and replacing those ugly torches with beautiful lanterns. I had just run upstairs to look for some materials when I heard a spider meandering about on my property, which seriously threw off my groove. I eventually found him on my roof, and before he could mansplain storm-resistant roof tiles to me, I demonstrated my rapidly improving archery skills. Then I had to climb a pile of dirt to go pick up his mess. It is a good thing he got me out here, though. Being away from the basement gave me a chance to do a little design work on the ladder down to my mine. I know I was just replacing the blocks with cobblestone, but I like even my tunnels to look intentional. Thanks to my trip down to the mine, I had enough granite to finally finish the layout of the storage room. I was really happy with how it turned out. After making room to put a crafting table, the stone cutter, and a few furnaces in the room, I placed some chests down. Eventually, this room would be full of them, and then started the long process of moving all my stuff downstairs. Putting all my stuff in the storage room gave me a bigger feeling of accomplishment than I expected. I think when you set up a storage system that makes sense to you and you get organized, you feel more prepared and less frantic, and you start to feel more confident, like you could take on anything. With the completion of my storage room, I was right where I wanted to be, self-sufficient. After setting up my own farm and capturing some farm animals, I could theoretically stay up on my mountain forever and never die. And with my storage room, I wouldn't lose track of anything. But simply surviving wasn't the only reason I was here. I had bigger dreams. With my infrastructure firmly in place, I could truly set my sights on the Ender Dragon and focus on one thing: getting stronger.